The wind across the Llano Estacado tasted of rust and endings. It carried no rain, only the ghosts of it, and had not carried rain for more months than Tahbeen cared to count. He was a man of 23 winters, a warrior of the Noconi, and he watched the world shrink. He rode his paint mare low, his body part of the horse, his eyes scanning a horizon that shimmered with lies. The heat promised water where there was none. His past was a physical ache, a hollow in his chest where sickness had carved out his younger brother, where the treaties had stolen the land his father knew. Now, he and his people were pressed into a narrow space, a reservation that felt like a trap, and the water was failing. The creeks that should have run were dry, cracked mud beds. The guilt was a stone in his gut. His ancestors had lived freely under this sky, and he was watching his people learn to thirst. His braid, wrapped in otter fur, lay heavy on his back. His rifle was comfortable in the crook of his arm, but it was the bow he trusted. The rifle spoke the white man's language loud, final, and often dishonest. The bow whispered. He was watching the iron snake. From this low rise, he could see the glint of the rails, miles to the south, pushing west. Beside it ran the talking wire, thin and arrogant, humming with messages he could not understand but which he knew were stealing the world. They were planning to run the snake straight through the last of the good buffalo grounds, a place his grandfather had called the Field of Life. The shaggy beasts were almost gone, and now the railroad would scare away the last. He turned his mare's head, the movement fluid, and rode not toward his camp, but toward the place the people called the ancient creek bed. It was a secret, a place of last resort, a line of green hidden in the rock that held water even when the sky refused. It was his duty to watch it. It was his burden to know that watchers were no longer enough. Far to the east, in a world Tahbeen could not imagine, Eliza Hartford had spent 22 years believing in the power of the written word. She believed in the Boston newspapers, in the courts of law, and in the moral authority of a well-phrased argument. She also believed in the power of light. She wrestled with the tripod on the heaving, swaying floor of the stagecoach. Her equipment was heavy, her chemicals fragile. The smell of dust and unwashed bodies filled the coach, a stark contrast to the clean, sharp scent of collodion and silver nitrate she associated with her work. She was a photographer, a student of the wet plate process, and she had come west to find her aunt. Her aunt, a widow now, had married a man Eliza never met and had run a stage stop for 6 years. Her letters, once full of nervous excitement, had become sparse, tight with a worry Eliza could not decipher from so far away. So Eliza had packed her cameras, her glass plates, and her small trunk of teaching supplies, and used her inheritance to buy a one-way ticket. She would help her aunt, and perhaps she would teach. But mostly, she would document. She had seen the portraits in the Eastern studios, the stoic, grim-faced Indian chiefs, posed in woolen uniforms, their eyes deadened by the flash powder. She hated them. She wanted to capture life, not its opposite. She carried a quiet, fierce conviction that if people in Boston could just see the truth of this land and its people, fairly and without judgment, things would be different. She believed in facts. The stage stop, when they finally jolted to a halt, was a wound in the dust. It was not the bustling haven her aunt's early letters had described. It was 2 low buildings of sod and weathered plank, huddled by a line of dry willows. The water trough was empty. The corrals held only 3 tired-looking horses. Her aunt was thinner, the skin drawn tight over her knuckles, but her hug was strong. "Eliza, you came. You foolish, wonderful girl." The tension of the place was immediate. The drought was strangling them. The stage line was threatening to reroute, which would kill the stop completely. And there was a new kind of man in the territory. Her aunt explained that night, her voice low. Men who did not build, but only took. "His name is Silas Vane," her aunt said, staring into the weak flames of the cook stove. "He speculates. He buys land he has no right to, and he runs a rough crew. Comancheros, some call them. They trade whiskey and guns for stolen horses. Eliza felt a chill. Surely the law. Her aunt gave a short, bitter laugh. The law here is Marshal Kincaid, and he drinks Vane's whiskey and rides Vane's horses. They're partners in all but name. Eliza unpacked her things in a small, clean room. The wind moaned around the corners of the soddy. It was so different from the crisp, intellectual arguments of Boston. Here, the values were simpler and harder. Tobin, miles away, would have understood. His world was built on honor, on the weight of a promise spoken under the stars. Where a man's word was his soul, Eliza's world was built on paper contracts, laws, newspapers, and she was beginning to see that paper burned. The pressure point was the railroad. It was coming, and it needed water. The company men had been through, their surveying tools like skeletal fingers pointing at the land. They had declared the planned route would require a permanent water station. Vane wants to provide it. Her aunt said, "He's been sniffing around for weeks, trying to find a source no one else knows about. He wants to buy this stop. Eliza, he wants it for pennies, so he can control the water when the railroad comes." "But there is no water," Eliza said, looking at the dry well. Her aunt's eyes grew distant. "There is always water, for those who know where to look. My husband, before he died, he had friends, one in particular. A Comanche man, a good man. He worried about his people, about what would happen. He trusted me." She went to a sturdy chest and unlocked it. From beneath a stack of linens, she pulled a rolled piece of hide, wrapped in cloth. "He gave this to me. He said it was a map, not of lines on paper, but of memory. A map to the ancient creek bed. He said it was the tribe's secret, their heart. He made me promise to give it only to the right person, someone who would share the water, not hoard it, someone who would honor the memory." She looked at Eliza, her face etched with exhaustion and fear. "I've held it for 2 years. Now Vane is here, and Kincaid, and the railroad. They're squeezing this land, and I think they know something exists. They can smell it, like predators. I'm afraid, Eliza, I'm afraid of holding it, and I'm terrified of giving it to the wrong hands." Eliza looked at the simple bundle. A map, a secret, a promise between a dead white man and his dead Comanche friend. In Boston, this would be a matter for the courts, for the newspapers. Here, under the vast, indifferent sky of the Llano Estacado, it felt like a fuse. Tobin stood over the ancient creek bed. It was not a creek, not anymore. It was a deep, narrow scar in the earth, hidden by cottonwoods and high rock, where water still seeped from the stone, creating a few dark, precious pools. He knelt, touched his fingers to the damp earth, and prayed. He prayed for rain. He prayed for the wisdom of his grandfather, and he prayed for strength, because he knew, with the certainty of a hunter, that others were now sniffing the air for this last, sacred place. The air was full of the scent of leather, the grit of dust, and the metallic tang of oncoming trouble. 2 worlds, his and hers, were about to collide over the one thing neither could live without. The night was a void. The stagecoach, a box of noise and shaking bones, plunged through it. Eliza Hartford held her heavy camera case on her lap, a solid, familiar weight in the lurching darkness. She and her aunt were crowded onto the bench with a drummer selling patent medicines and a nervous young family, their faces pale in the intermittent moonlight. They were going to Willow Mound. Her aunt had insisted. "The stop is not safe, Eliza, not with Vane's men crawling all over the territory. We will register the deed in town. And this—" She had patted the small, iron-banded strongbox now lodged under the driver's seat. "This needs to be in the bank's vault." Eliza suspected the box held the deed to the stop, and perhaps that precious, dangerous map of hide. She had not asked. In the 2 weeks since her arrival, she had learned that questions in this land often had answers as hard as a bullet. Miles away, Tobin lay on his belly on a rise. The paint mare ground hitched in a gully behind him. He was not alone. 2 other Noconi, shadows among the yucca, lay with him, They were not watching the stagecoach trail. They were watching a dry wash to the north, a known route for Comancheros moving stolen cavalry horses. The air was still, and Ta Bin could taste the tension in it. The moon was too bright. It made the land sharp and colorless, a world of silver and black. A rumble came, not from the wash, but from the stage road. Ta Bin ignored it. The noisy, rattling box of the white men was no concern of his. It was a problem for other white men. Then he heard the single, sharp crack of a rifle, followed by a yell that was not a warrior's cry, but a ragged shout of greed. Get the box, the one for the Hartford woman. The stagecoach driver screamed. A high, thin sound cut short. The coach slewed, the horses neighing in terror. Gunshots exploded, orange flashes in the dark. Men on horseback swarmed the coach, their faces covered with bandanas. Comancheros, Vane's men. Ta Bin cursed, low and soft. He would have left. It was not his fight. But then a woman screamed from inside the coach, and one of the Comancheros ripped the canvas flap aside and fired his pistol into the darkness within. Ta Bin heard a child cry out, a sound of pure terror. His body went cold. He looked at his companions. Their faces were hard. He gave a sharp, single nod. His quarrel was with Vane, perhaps, but his honor was with the innocent. They would not kill women and children on his land. They moved like smoke, their horses low, coming up on the attackers from the dark side, the side away from the moon. Inside the coach, it was pandemonium. Eliza's aunt had gasped, a sharp intake of breath, and slumped against her. "Auntie," Eliza cried, but her voice was lost. The drummer was trying to push his pistol through the window. The young mother was shielding her child, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond screaming. Eliza felt a strange, cold calm. She was watching, documenting, the flash of the muzzles, the smell of sulfur and fear, the dark, leering face of a man who tore the door open. He was struck from his horse by a force that seemed to come from the night itself. An arrow, fletched with hawk feathers, appeared in his throat. He made no sound, just fell. Eliza stared. A new group of riders had entered the fray. They were not the attackers. They were lean, almost naked, and they fought with a silent, terrible efficiency. She saw one, his hair in 2 long braids, ride past the window. An Indian. They were being attacked by Indians. But the new arrivals were fighting the Comancheros. The world no longer made any sense. The coach lurched violently as the dying driver fell from his seat and the reins went slack. A wheel struck a large rock, and the axle snapped with the sound of a breaking bone. The heavy coach groaned, balanced for a heart-stopping second, and then began to topple. The door flew open. Eliza, clutching her camera case, was thrown out into the night. She did not feel the ground. Ta Bin had just sent an arrow into the back of a Comanchero, aiming at the coach. He was moving, his horse a part of him, flowing through the chaos. He saw the woman thrown from the tipping box. He had no time to think. It was instinct. He spurred his mare, one hard kick, and leaned low, his arm outstretched. He caught her, his arm wrapped around her waist, the impact hard enough to steal his breath. She was solid, real, and smelled of soap and chemicals, a clean, strange scent under the dust and blood. She slammed against his chest, her head tucked under his chin for a single, frozen moment. He set her on her feet, hard, his face a mask of stone. He could not be seen holding her. It was improper. It was dangerous. He pushed her toward a cluster of boulders. "Stay," he growled. Then he was gone, a shadow diving back into the fight. From the rocks, Eliza watched, her heart a cold hammer in her chest. She saw the man who had caught her. He was the leader. He fought not like the Comancheros, who were loud and sloppy, but with a focused grace. She saw him ride to the wrecked coach, pull the small, crying boy from the wreckage, and hand him to his hysterical mother. The fight was over in moments. The Comancheros, caught between the stage's defenders and Ta Bin's warriors, broke and fled. One of them, riding hard, yelled back, "The box, it went in the ravine, it is lost." Another shouted, "Tell Vane the map is gone, or still at the stop, he will know." They disappeared, leaving the wreckage and the dead. Tabin's men were already vanishing. They did not wait for thanks. They did not wait for the inevitable cavalry patrol that the gunfire would bring. Tabin himself was the last to leave. He wheeled his mare, and for a second, his eyes met Eliza's. In the moonlight, she saw his face, high cheekboned, impassive, his eyes holding no softness at all. He rode toward her, and she flinched, pulling her aunt's limp body closer. Her aunt was breathing, but it was shallow, and there was a dark stain spreading on her dress. Tabin did not stop. He rode past, and as he passed, he tossed something small to the ground at her feet. It was a small loop of dark blue beads, a protective charm, to ward off the spirits of the night's violence. He did not look back. By the time the survivors gathered their wits, they were gone. The drummer was dead. The young father was wounded. The strongbox was somewhere in the blackness of the ravine. Lost. They limped the last 2 miles to Willow Mound, carrying the wounded. Eliza sat in the small, bare office of the town doctor, her hands stained with her aunt's blood. The doctor, a tired man with whiskey on his breath, had shaken his head. "The bullet is deep, miss, near the spine. I have done what I can. She needs rest and prayer." Eliza sat by the cot for an hour, watching the ragged rise and fall of her aunt's chest. She was alone, clutching the small, cool loop of beads. Just before dawn, her aunt's eyes flickered open. They were cloudy with pain, but they focused on Eliza. "Eliza?" Her voice was a dry whisper, like leaves. "I am here, Auntie, I am here." The box, it was a ruse, just old papers. Knew Vane would try. She coughed, a terrible, wet sound that racked her small frame. Eliza held her hand. "Do not speak. Rest." "No, must listen." Her aunt's grip tightened, surprisingly strong. "The map. He was so clever. My husband's friend. He knew paper could be stolen, could be burned." "What are you saying?" Eliza whispered, her throat tight. "It is in the camera. Child, not the camera. The glass, the plates." Her eyes searched Eliza's face. "The dark room? He showed me a chemical wash, only in the dark. The dark reveals the stars. The map is the stars. Trust no one. Eliza." Her eyes closed, and her grip went slack. She was not dead, but she had fallen back into the deep well of unconsciousness. Eliza Hartford sat in the cold, gray light of dawn in a town she did not know, a dying woman's impossible secret in her mind, and a Comanche warrior's beaded charm in her hand. The world of Boston, of law and newspapers, had never felt so far away. It had never felt so useless. The world was suddenly too quiet. Eliza sat on the hard cot in the doctor's back room, the loop of blue beads a circle of cold pressure in her palm. Her aunt's breathing was the only sound, a shallow, painful rasp that seemed to be counting the seconds. The doctor, having done all he could, was snoring in his front office, a bottle of whiskey his only companion. Dawn came, not as a relief, but as a dirty gray light that revealed the dust on the floorboards and the dried blood on her cuffs. Her aunt's words from the night echoed in her head. "It is in the camera. The dark reveals the stars." She had to get back to the stage stop. Her aunt was too weak to move, but the secret was at the station. Vulnerable. She left a note, promising to return by evening, and paid a boy from the livery stable $2 whole to drive her back in a buckboard. The boy, spooked by the stories of the attack, dropped her at the edge of the property and fled as if the devil himself were at his heels. The stop was a place of ghosts. The wrecked stagecoach was still in the road, a dark, broken skeleton. She walked past it, her box of glass plates heavy in her arms. She entered her small room. The air was still and close. She nailed a heavy horse blanket over the one window, plunging the room into a thick, suffocating blackness. She lit her small, red, dark room lantern. Its glow was a weak, bloody eye in the gloom. Her hands shook as she unpacked her chemicals. The acrid smells of ether and collodion filled her nostrils, a strange comfort from her old life. The glass, the plates. It could not be one she had already taken. That made no sense. It had to be a plate hidden among her blank ones. She opened a fresh, sealed box of 8 by 10-inch plates. She ran her fingers over them. One felt different. It was not slick and smooth. It felt textured. She held it up to the red light. Nothing. It was just a dark rectangle. With a surge of desperation, she began the process. She poured the developer, the solution of ferrous sulfate, onto the plate, her hands moving with a ritualistic grace. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The air was thick with the scent of acid. It was not a photograph. At first, she thought she had ruined it. The plate was fogging, turning a milky gray. But then, as if a ghost were breathing on the glass, lines began to appear. They were not the lines of a landscape. They were sharp, thin, and deliberate. A complex, branching line that looked like a dry riverbed seen from a great height. Dotted along it were symbols, small and precise, which she did not recognize. And above them, scattered like jewels, were pinpricks of light. She held it closer to the red lamp, her heart climbing into her throat. They were stars. It was the Big Dipper, its handle pointing to a single, bright star. It was the W of Cassiopeia. It was a map, a celestial guide laid over a secret artery of the earth. The Comanche friend had not drawn a map. He had written a poem of sky and water. She plunged the plate into the fixing bath, the cyanide solution stinging her cuticles. She washed it, her movements frantic. She had it. She held the secret of the Llano Estacado. She had just hidden the wet, gleaming plate under the loose floorboard beneath her cot when she heard the sound of a well-groomed horse, not the tired, plodding gait of a cavalry mount, but the crisp, proud step of a thoroughbred. She stepped out into the blinding sunlight, shielding her eyes. A man sat on a beautiful black horse. He was dressed in a fine Boston suit, his boots polished to a mirror shine. Only his eyes, cold and pale as a winter sky, were out of place. It was Silas Vane. He tipped his hat, a gesture of perfect, mocking politeness. "Miss Hartford, I presume? A terrible tragedy. I was so sorry to hear of your aunt's misfortune, and the attack." "You seem to know a great deal, Mr. Vane," Eliza said, her voice steadier than she felt. He smiled. "I make it my business to know things. This is a hard land, Miss Hartford. It requires friends. I came to offer my condolences and my protection." "We are not in need of protection. Your wrecked stagecoach and your wounded aunt would suggest otherwise." He swung down from the saddle, his movements fluid. He was a handsome man, she realized, in the way a wolf is handsome. "I will be blunt. I am a businessman. The railroad is coming, and it needs water. This station, it is perfectly placed, but it is dry." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "I am prepared to offer you $500 for the exclusive water rights to this property." "My aunt is the owner, and she is unwell." "A woman alone," Vane said, ignoring her. "It's at such a disadvantage. I could post some of my men here to ensure no further accidents." "I believe the term is extortion, Mr. Vane." His smile tightened. "That is a very Eastern word. Here, we call it survival. Think on my offer. I will be in Willow Mound tomorrow. Do not make a poor decision." He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Eliza in a cloud of dust. She had 2 hours of peace, 2 hours of pacing the small room, the map plate a burning coal under the floor. Then A new visitor arrived. This one was not polite. Marshal Kincaid's horse looked as tired and unkempt as he did. He spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed inches from her boot. "Ma'am," he grunted. "Heard you were back. Cannot have civilians at an unsecured crime scene." "This is my home, Marshal." "It is a crime scene," he snapped, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "I am here to conduct a formal search for evidence." He pushed past her into the house. It was not a search, it was a violation. He upended her trunk. He pulled her bedding onto the floor. He was not looking for clues. He was looking for a map. His eyes fell on her camera equipment, stacked in the corner. "What is all this junk?" "My photographic equipment." He picked up her heavy box camera, turning it over in his greasy hands. "Heard about this. Folks in town say you make pictures with light." He narrowed his eyes, a flicker of sharp, drunken intelligence in them. "You take any pictures of the attack?" "It was dark. Marshal, as you know." "You take any pictures since?" He gestured vaguely at the landscape. "Pictures of rocks, creeks, anything strange?" "I am an artist. Marshal, not a surveyor." He grunted. He ran his hand through her box of clean plates, his dirty fingers smudging the glass. Eliza held her breath. He moved to her cot. He kicked it. The wood was solid. He did not notice the single loose floorboard. "You see anything?" he said, moving to the door. "You report it to me. You see any Indians, you report it. I am the law. You do not forget it." When he was gone, Eliza sank onto the floor, her body trembling. The law was in league with the devil. Vane's polite threats, Kincaid's clumsy search. They were a pincer, and she was trapped. Her Boston ideals, however, were not entirely dead. They were just wounded. If the law was corrupt, she would appeal to the people. She would take the plate to Willow Mound. She would show it to the town council, to the other ranchers, the preacher, the blacksmith. She would make the secret public. Vane could not fight an entire town. She looked out the window. The sun was getting low, painting the dust-filled sky a violent, bloody orange. Tobin, from his hidden place in the rocks a mile away, watched her. He had seen Vane come and go. He had seen the badge-wearing man. He knew this woman was a focal point for the trouble. And then he saw what they did not. He saw 3 men, riding low and fast, their bodies painted for war. But they were not warriors. They were Vane's dogs. He recognized one from the stagecoach attack. They were not riding to the front door. They were fanning out, dismounting in the brush, and in their hands they carried torches. Eliza was packing her satchel. She carefully wrapped the precious plate in 3 layers of cloth and placed it at the bottom. She would leave before first light. A sound, a horse, snorting, too close. She looked out the window. A man was standing by the stable. He was not Tobin. He was not Vane. He was one of the men from the stagecoach. He lifted his arm, and a burning stick arced through the air, landing on the dry, brittle roof of the barn. The wood exploded in flame. "No!" she screamed. Gunfire shattered the window. A bullet sang past her head, thudding into the sod wall. The Comancheros were not here to talk. They were here to erase the station, and her with it. Another torch hit the roof of the house. Smoke began to curl from the ceiling. It was hot, stinging her eyes. She grabbed the satchel. The map. She had to save the map. The front door burst open. A man stood silhouetted against the roaring flames of the barn, his face a mask of hate, a long knife in his hand. He lunged for her. He was stopped by a force he never saw. An arrow, black and silent, sprouted from his chest. He looked down, a strange, confused expression on his face, and fell. Tobin stood in the doorway, the firelight dancing on his bare chest. He was a thing of smoke and vengeance. He did not look at her. He looked past her. "Get out." He grabbed her arm, his fingers a vice, and hauled her through the door, out into the yard. The heat was a physical blow. The entire station was turning into a furnace. A second Comanchero was firing at them from behind the water trough. Tabine loosed an arrow, and the man screamed and fell. Eliza, gasping for air, clutched the satchel. A bullet ripped through the air, striking the leather strap of the bag. The strap snapped. The satchel, containing the glass map, fell to the ground between them. She lunged for it. The plate! The last Comanchero, seeing his partners dead, saw his chance. He spurred his horse out from behind the burning stable, riding low. He was not coming for them. He was coming for the bag. He leaned down, his arm outstretched, and snagged the satchel from the dust. No! Eliza shrieked, running after him. Tabine was already moving. He fired. The arrow flew true, but the rider was moving too fast. It struck the man's horse in the rump. The horse screamed, but it did not fall. It only ran faster, carrying the rider and the stolen map into the darkness. Eliza stopped, her shoulders slumping. She stared into the night that had swallowed the secret. She turned to Tabine. He was standing in the terrible light of her burning home, his face a mask of cold fury. "What did they take?" he asked, his voice low, guttural. "My satchel," she choked, her voice raw with smoke and tears. "What was in it?" he demanded, shaking her. "The map," she whispered, the fight gone out of her. It was the map, on glass, a map to the ancient creek bed. He let go of her. The fury did not leave his face, but it was joined by a cold, terrible understanding. Vane had not just burned her home. He had stolen Tabine's birthright. He looked at the fire, then at her, this white woman, this bringer of chaos. She was his only link. "Vane will have the glass," he said. "His men cannot read it, not yet, but Vane is smart. He will find someone who can—" Eliza looked at him. The man who had caught her, the man who had saved her, the man who was her opposite in every way. "We have to get it back," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement. Her voice was as hard as the dry, cracked earth around them. He looked at her for a long moment. The flames reflected in his dark eyes. He gave one sharp nod. "We ride, now." He gave her no time for grief. The flames were a roar that swallowed the sound of her home collapsing. Tabine pulled her toward his paint mare, his face a mask of stone in the flickering, hellish light. He said something to his horse in a language she did not understand. A low, urgent command. The mare stood, trembling but obedient. "We ride," he said. It was not a request. He had no other horse. He swung up behind the cantle, his movements a single, fluid piece of power. He reached a hard arm down for her. "Now!" Eliza looked at the burning ruin. Her camera, her clothes, her life in Boston. All of it was turning to ash. All except the one thing that mattered. The one thing she had saved by pure reflex, the small, sturdy box camera she had been packing when the attack began. She had grabbed its strap as he pulled her from the room. She was still clutching it. She took his hand. His grip was not gentle, but it was sure. He pulled her up, seating her sideways in front of him, her back pressed hard against his chest. She could feel the heat of his skin through his buckskin vest. He kicked the mare, and they plunged from the circle of firelight into the absolute, swallowing darkness of the prairie. They rode for hours. She was bounced and jolted, her body numb, her mind a blank slate of shock. The only reality was the man behind her. He was a wall of heat and muscle, his arm locked around her waist, holding her to the horse. He smelled of smoke, horse, and a faint, clean scent of sage. She did not know if she was a prisoner or a survivor. Just before the sky turned from black to gray, he stopped. He slid from the mare's back and lifted her down. Her legs buckled, and for a second she had to grip his shoulders to keep from falling. His shoulders were wide, solid as rock. He let her hold on for a moment, his hands at his sides, neither helping nor stopping her. Then she found her strength and stepped back. They were in a shallow dip. hidden from the open plain. The air was cold. Eliza shivered, her dress thin, her hands raw. The silence of the plains was as overwhelming as the fire's roar had been. "You are safe," he said. His voice was low. "For now." "My aunt," Eliza said, her voice a croak. "In town. I have to—" "Willow Mound is that way." He pointed east. "It is a half-day's walk. You will not be followed." She stared at him. "You are leaving me?" He looked at the new pale light on the horizon. "My fight is for the map. Your fight is for your family. They are not the same." "They are," she said, a sudden, fierce anger cutting through her shock. "Do you think Vane will stop? He burned my home. He stole your secret. He has men. That marshal. They will not stop until they have that water. My aunt, your people, we are all in their way. Your fight is my fight, whether you like it or not." He turned, his black eyes searching her face. He was seeing her for the first time, not as a screaming woman or a bundle to be rescued, but as a person. She did not flinch. "The white man's law," Tabin said, his voice flat with contempt, "is with Vane. You saw the badge. Then we must be a different kind of law." A small, grim smile touched the corner of his mouth for an instant. "A law under the stars." He turned to the east, where the sun was now a red sliver. He raised his hand. "I make this vow. I will not sleep in a lodge. I will not rest until the glass is returned. I will get you to your aunt's side in safety, and I will see that Silas Vane does not steal the water. The ancient creek bed is for all who thirst, or it is for no one. This is my word." The simple, unadorned promise held more weight than any legal document she had ever seen. It was a contract of honor, sealed in the dawn, witnessed by nothing but the dust. He put 2 fingers to his lips and whistled, a low, warbling sound. In a few minutes, a second warrior appeared, leading a horse. Tabin spoke to him in their language. The man, young and scarred, looked at Eliza with open suspicion, but he handed the reins of his horse to Tabin and melted back into the landscape. "He will watch us," Tabin said, handing her the reins. "But you will not see him." The journey began. It was not a journey to Willow Mound, but a wide, looping circle to the north, following the faint, desperate tracks of the Comanchero and his wounded horse. Tabin rode in silence, his eyes on the ground, reading a story Eliza could not see. He taught her, in blunt, single words, "Shod horse runs in pain, bleeding." He pointed to a small, dark speck on a rock. In turn, to fill the agonizing, tense silence, she showed him her camera. "It is a box for light," she said, her voice rough. He looked at the lens, the evil eye, as his people called it. "It steals the spirit." "No," she said, her teacher's instincts rising. "It does not steal. It borrows. It borrows the light that bounces off a person. It makes a memory. See?" She unlatched the back, showing him the empty, dark interior. "It is just wood and glass and a place to hold the chemicals. It is a tool, like your bow." He was not convinced, but he watched as she explained, with her hands, how the light would burn an image onto the glass plate she would have prepared. He touched the brass lens, his finger tracing its curve. "You make truth," he said, not as a question. I try," she said, and for the first time, she felt a pinprick of doubt. Her truth, Boston's truth. What did that mean out here? Her initial, naive plan to show the map to the town council now seemed like a child's fantasy. She had seen Vane, seen Kincaid. To them, the map was not a sacred trust. It was a deed. It was money. It was power. To reveal it publicly would be to sentence the Comanche to a new war, a war of lawyers and surveyors they could never win. She was now, she realized, in a conspiracy to hide the truth, and it felt, terrifyingly, like the right thing to do. Tabin, too, was fighting his own ghosts. The tracks were leading them deeper into the broken lands, closer to the sacred spaces, closer to the ancient creek bed itself. He was bringing a white woman, an outsider, into the heart of his world. Every rock, every dry wash, felt like an ancestor's eye, watching him, judging him. He had taken a vow to protect this land, and here he was, leading this strange, sharp-eyed woman toward it. But what choice did he have? She was the only one who had seen the map. She was the key. On the third day, the sky turned against them. It began as a yellow haze in the west, a stain on the perfect blue. Tabin saw it and his face tightened. "Breathe the wind," he commanded. Eliza did. It was hot, and it tasted of fine, gritty sand. "Dust," he said. "We find shelter." There was no shelter. It was the open, endless plain. The yellow haze became a brown wall, 1,000 feet high, eating the sky. The sound began, a low, humming roar that grew into a freight train scream. Get off!" Tabin yelled. Leaping from his mare, he pulled Eliza from her horse. He grabbed the heavy buffalo hide from his saddle roll and threw it over them. Here against the rock. It was not a rock. It was a shallow depression, barely 2 feet deep. He pushed her into it, covering her with his own body, pulling the hide over them both. The world ended. Darkness, absolute and suffocating. The wind shrieked, a physical force that tried to peel the hide from his grip. Sand and gravel hammered against the leather, a deafening, constant barrage. Eliza buried her face in his chest, her hands fisted in his vest. She was not afraid of him. She was afraid of the planet itself. He was the only solid thing in a universe that was trying to tear itself apart. He held her. His arm was a band of iron around her, his other hand gripping the edge of the hide with a strength that defied the storm. They lay like that for hours. Two people, two worlds, pressed together by a force older than either of them. When it finally passed, it left a silence as profound as the noise had been. Tabin pushed the hide, heavy with an inch of sand. Off them, the world was new. The sky was a strange, bruised purple. The sun was a dull red coin. Every feature of the land was smoothed, softened, buried. Eliza coughed, her throat raw. She sat up, her hair, her clothes, her skin, all one color. Tabin was beside her, his braid caked with mud. He looked at her, and she looked at him. They were alive. They had survived. He handed her the canteen. "Drink!" That night, they shared a fire, small and smokeless, made of dried buffalo chips. The air was cold and clean. "You are not afraid," he said, watching her. "I was," she admitted, her voice low. "But not of you." She told him then about her aunt, the stubborn widow who had run a stage stop, about her own foolish belief that a photograph could change the world. He listened, and when she was done, he told her of his brother, taken by the coughing sickness the soldiers brought. He told her of the promise he had made to his dying grandfather, to keep the water safe, to keep the people whole. They were no longer a warrior and a white woman. They were two people, bound by loss, and by a shared, impossible duty. On the 5th day, they found the Comanchero's horse. It was dead in a gully, its leg broken. The man was gone, on foot, and he was not far. They reached the crest of a ridge that overlooked Willow Mound from the north. Tabin put his hand on her arm, pulling her low. "Wait." He lay flat, looking at the town. It was a mile away. He was watching the telegraph office, the talking wire. Eliza lay beside him, her camera box clutched in her hand. They watched as Marshal Kincaid walked into the small building. They watched as one of Vane's men, a man she recognized from the fire, went in after him. Then a new man arrived. He wore the blue uniform of a United States cavalry scout. He went inside. 10 minutes later, he came out, laughing, with Silas Vane himself. Vane clapped him on the back and handed him a small, heavy bag. Ta Bin let out his breath, a low, hissing sound. He understood. Vane was not just an outlaw. He was a general. He was not just stealing land. He was conquering it. The telegraph was his weapon. The law was his shield. And the army, led by this paid traitorous scout, was his sword. "He will bring the soldiers," Ta Bin said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "He will tell them we are hostile. He will tell them we are a threat to the railroad. And they will come, and they will pacify us. And he will take the water. He will be a hero of progress." He turned to look at her. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning. "I cannot fight Vane and the United States Army by myself," Ta Bin said. "If we get that glass back, you are the only one who can read it. You are the only one who can explain it." "What are you saying?" "I am breaking a law of my people, a law older than your nation," he said. "I am taking you to the Council of Elders. You will speak to them. You will show them your truth, and they will decide if you are a friend, or if we are all going to die." He did not take her to Willow Mound. He turned his horse north, away from the town, away from the telegraph wire and the traders in blue, and led her into the Badlands. The land was a sea of broken red rock, canyons and hoodoos, a place designed to kill the careless. He moved through it with the effortless grace of a man walking through his own home. Eliza followed. She had no choice, and for the first time she was not certain she would have made a different one if she had. Her world had been burned to the ground. The only thing she had left was the heavy box camera in her hand and the strange, binding promise she had made with this man. She had left her aunt in a town run by thieves, and her only hope of helping her was to ride away from her. The logic of it was as twisted as the canyons they now entered. Ta Bin did not speak for hours. He was breaking a law that held his world together. To bring an outsider into the Nadu Vipui, the hidden, sacred camp, was a crime that could mean exile. But Vane, Kincaid, and the talking wire had changed the rules. His grandfather had taught him that a warrior must adapt or his people will die. He was adapting, and it felt like swallowing glass. The camp was not a camp. It was a whisper. Ta Bin led her down a narrow slot in a rock wall she would have missed entirely. A passage so tight their knees brushed the stone. It opened into a small, sunken valley, a bowl of green cottonwoods and a thin, slow-moving stream. Teepees were hidden among the trees, their smoke filtered by the leaves, invisible from the plain above. It was a place of women, children, and old men. The warriors, Ta Bin's companions, were elsewhere, watching Vane, watching the railroad. As they rode in, a silence fell. Faces turned, dark eyes full of suspicion, watching her. This was not the welcome of a grateful people. It was the fear of a people who had learned that new faces always meant new pain. Ta Bin slid from his mare and helped her down, his hand firm on her elbow. He did not release her, but led her, his hand still on her arm, toward the largest teepee, the one with the painted symbols of the stars and the buffalo. He was not asking. He was claiming responsibility. His touch was a shield and a public declaration. This woman is with me. The elders were waiting, summoned by a runner. They sat in a half-circle on buffalo robes. They were 4 old men, their faces like maps of the very land Ta Bin was trying to save. Their leader, a man with a chest full of presents and eyes that had seen 100 winters, was 10 bears. Ta Bin spoke, his voice low, rhythmic. In the Comanche language, he spoke for a long time. Eliza stood, clutching her camera, feeling as out of place as a ship on the desert. She could not understand his words, but she understood his tone. It was urgent, respectful, and hard as iron. He pointed to her, not accusingly, but as a statement of fact. He pointed to the east, toward Willow Mound. He held up his hand, fingers splayed, and ticked one down. Vane, he ticked down another. Kincaid, a third, the soldier scout. Then he looked at Ten Bears and said her name. Eliza Hartford. He gestured to her. She was on the rattling box. She sat with the child, and she did not run. The fire came, and she did not run. Vane's men came, and she did not run. She holds the map. It is in her mystery box. He pointed at the camera. She is the only one who can read the stars. She came to me, to us, for justice. I have given my word to stand with her. Ten Bears looked at Eliza. His gaze was heavy, not unkind, but heavy. He spoke, and his voice was like gravel and honey. Tabin translated, his words short. He asks why you did not go to your own law. My law is corrupt, Eliza said, her own voice surprisingly clear. Marshal Kincaid is a partner with Silas Vane. They mean to steal the water. They burned my home because of it. Tabin translated. The old men nodded slowly. This they understood. The council respects the word of Tabin. He translated again. The old man's eyes on her. They see you are not a weak woman, but you are white. The map is Comanche. It belongs to the people. It was given in trust to my family, Eliza countered, by a Comanche man who trusted my aunt's husband. He trusted him to share it, not to hoard it. Vane wants to hoard it. Your people and my people in the town, the small ranchers, we are all thirsty. Vane wants to make us his slaves with this water. She had said the right thing. The old men murmured. The concept of hoarding water was an offense against the Creator. A new voice cut in, sharp and angry. A young warrior stood at the edge of the tent. His chest was scarred, his eyes hot. She lies, he said in broken English, jabbing a finger at her. All white people lie, Tabin. You shame us. You bring this woman to our sacred place. She will sell us for silver. Stonehand speaks with a child's anger, Tabin said, not turning, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. He has not seen what I have seen. He turned to the young warrior. I stand for her. Her word is my word. Her honor is my honor. If she betrays us, you may take my knife and cut my throat. I am her nami votapo, her guarantee. Stonehand looked stunned. Tabin had just pledged his life. The young warrior spat on the ground but stepped back, silenced by the weight of the oath. Ten Bears raised his hand. It is decided. We are in a new time. The old ways are cracked. We must make new ones. He looked at Eliza, then at Tabin. The glass map will not be opened here. It will not be opened in the white man's town. It will be taken to the ancient creek bed. It will be opened there. Under the stars it shows. And you, he said to Eliza, will not be alone. We will send for the honest men in the town, the blacksmith, the preacher, the ranchers Vane is trying to crush. They will come, too. We will make a new covenant, not of Comanche or white, but of the thirsty. It was a judgment of breathtaking wisdom. Eliza felt a knot of fear loosen. I agree. It is not yet done. Ten Bears said he was given a small clay cup of water from the stream. He drank, then handed it to Tabin. Tabin drank, then handed it to Eliza. She looked at the cup, then at the old man, and she drank. The water was cold and clean. Now, Ten Bears said, you are bound. You have shared the water. You will not sell it. You will not steal it. You will not hoard it. You will protect it, as one people. They held their hands, all three, over the small, smokeless fire in the center of the lodge. Not so close as to burn, but close enough to feel the heat. A promise. They were interrupted by a sound from outside. A horse, ridden hard, a young man, barely 18, stumbled into the lodge, his chest heaving. He was one of Tabin's scouts. Tabin, he gasped, ignoring the elders. The talking wire. It worked. Kincaid. He has a paper, a federal order, signed by a judge in Austin. He is seizing the entire wetlands, our sacred lands. For the railroad. For a public reservoir. He says any who resist are enemies of the government. The soldiers. A full troop. They ride from Fort Sill in 2 days. The blood drained from Eliza's face. They are legalizing the theft. Ta Bin's face was unreadable. 2 days. He looked at 10 bears. The soldiers will ride the main trail. Vane will lead them. They will come from the east. We cannot beat them. But we can be there first. 10 bears said. The ride to the creek bed is a day, Stonehand said, sneering. You will meet them there. You ride the long way, Ta Bin said, his eyes now alive with a cold, tactical fire. I will not. He looked at Eliza. The shortcut, the one my grandfather showed me, through the canyon of the Snake. 10 bears nodded slowly. It is a hard path, a path of ghosts. It is a fast path, Ta Bin said. He turned to Eliza. Can you ride? I can, she said, though her body ached. We leave in 1 hour. They rode out of the hidden valley, just the two of them. The trust of the council was a heavy weight on their shoulders. They rode north into a landscape that grew more broken, more hostile. Late in the afternoon, Ta Bin reined in his horse, his hand up for silence. He dismounted and crept to the edge of a high, narrow ridge. He motioned for her to join him. She crawled beside him, her heart pounding. She looked down. Below them was a small, perfectly hidden box canyon, a natural corral. Inside it were at least 20 horses. Vanes, Ta Bin whispered. How do you know? He pointed. The brand, not the SV he puts on his fancy thoroughbreds. That one. It was a circle, with a line through it. His Comanchero mark. And look, he pointed to a big roan. That is a cavalry horse. From Fort Sill. He is stealing from the army he is about to lead. Eliza's hands automatically went to her camera. If I had light, if I had my plates, I could prove it. Proof is for your world, Ta Bin said, his voice bitter. In my world, this is simply a fact. We must be our own proof. They backed away, leaving the horses, but now they had a new weapon Vane's crime. In plain sight. That night, they made a cold camp under a high silver moon. The air was sharp, and the world was black and white. They sat on opposite sides of a tiny, smokeless fire, the silence between them different. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of allies, heavy with unspoken things. She watched him. He was not a savage. He was a man of deep, profound principle. Bound by oath she was only beginning to understand. He was carrying the survival of his people on his shoulders. And now he was carrying her, too. He watched her. She was not the frail, pale woman he had first assumed. She was like a new-forged knife, all dust and fire, her edges sharp. She had not cried. She had not complained. She had ridden as hard as he had. And her eyes, when she looked at the corrupt marshal, had held a fire that matched his own. The stars, she said, her voice soft, looking up. The ones on the map, are they the ones you see? He looked up. We do not see them as you do. You see a pot. He pointed to the dipper. We see the bear, running, leading us to the safe hunting. And that, the W you call it, that is the eagle, flying to the house of the Creator. He pointed to the North Star. That is the star that does not move. It is our anchor. It is the center of the world. The map. It is anchored to that star. A map and a compass, she whispered, understanding. He nodded. He felt a sudden, sharp ache in his chest, a feeling he had not had since before his brother died. It was a feeling of connection. He looked at her, really looked at her, and he saw not a white woman, but just Eliza. And he knew, in that moment, that he would protect her not just because of his vow, but because it was her. He banked the fire. We sleep. Tomorrow is the canyon. It will be the hardest day. She nodded, wrapping herself in her blanket. her back to a rock. He lay 10 feet away, his rifle in his hand, his face to the sky. They were alone, together, and the moon was a cold, bright witness to the growing, dangerous thing between them. Dawn came, and with it, the sharp crack of a rifle. A bullet screamed off the rock where Eliza's head had been a moment before. She had been waking, stretching, when Tabin's hand had clamped on her shoulder, shoving her down. Comancheros! He was on his feet, returning fire with his rifle, pulling her toward the horses. They were on the ridges above. 6 of them. They were caught. "The canyon!" he yelled, throwing her onto her horse. "It is our only chance, ride, and do not look back." He fired twice more, leaped onto his mare, and they plunged into the narrow, winding darkness of the canyon, the hoofbeats of their pursuers echoing behind them. The canyon was a trap of sound. Every shot, every hoofbeat, echoed from the narrow sandstone walls, multiplying the 6 Comancheros into an army. Tabin rode his mare like a part of her, his body low, weaving through the rock and scree, his old rifle in one hand. Eliza clung to her horse, her knuckles white, her camera box strapped to her back, slamming against her with every jolt. A bullet screamed past her ear, chipping stone just ahead. She flinched, but she did not scream. She had forgotten how. "He is too far for the bow!" Tabin yelled, his voice snatched by the wind. He fired his rifle, a single, booming shot that sent one of the pursuers ducking behind an outcrop. He was buying them seconds. They rounded a tight, blind corner, and Tabin reined in so hard his mare nearly sat. A dead end. A sheer wall of rock rose 20 feet high. They were boxed in. The Comancheros, whooping, slowed their approach, filing into the narrow space. They had them, the leader, a man Eliza recognized from the fire, the one who had stolen her satchel, grinned, showing yellow teeth. He was holding the bag now, patting it. "Thank you for the chase. Indio now, throw down the guns, and the girl can—" Tabin was not listening. He had dropped his rifle and his bow was in his hand. An arrow knocked, all in one fluid motion. He was scanning the rim of the canyon above them. "You," he grunted at Eliza. "The mystery box. What is in it?" My tools," she panted, her mind racing. "Glass, chemicals, and—" An idea, cold and bright as a chemical flash, seized her. "Powder. For the light. Magnesium." His eyes, flat and black, met hers. He did not understand the word, but he understood the desperation. Light. "A sun," she said, her hands already fumbling with the strap on her camera box. "A piece of the sun. It blinds." He understood. How long? Seconds. She had the small, sealed tin of fine, gray powder in her hand. She had her striker, the flint and steel she'd used for her dark-room lamp. "Get behind me, when I say," he hissed. He raised his bow, not at the men below, but at the rock wall above them. An arrow flew, its line trailing a thin sinew cord, a line he always kept ready. It snagged on a dead, dry bush hanging over the ledge. The Comancheros laughed. "He is trying to fly away." "Now!" Tabin yelled at her. Eliza dumped a heavy pile of the gray powder onto a flat rock at her feet. "Cover your eyes!" she shrieked at him. She struck the steel against the flint. A spark, a second. The spark caught. It was not a fire. It was an explosion of pure, white light, brighter than the sun, brighter than 1,000 lightning bolts. It filled the narrow canyon with a blinding, painful, actinic glare that turned the red rocks to bleached bone. The men screamed, their horses screamed, rearing, their eyes seared by the flash. The men dropped their rifles, clutching at their faces. "My eyes, Dios, my eyes!" Tabin had not covered his eyes. He had been waiting. As the light bloomed, he fired a second arrow, this one not at the rocks. It flew true, striking the man with the satchel in his right shoulder. The man howled, a sound of agony and surprise, and dropped the bag. Ta-bin was off his horse, a knife in his hand. He was on the man in a second, his foot on his chest. He cut the satchel strap from where it was tangled, grabbed the bag, and was back on his mare. A wild shot, fired by a blind man, tore through the air. The bullet ripped a long, shallow, burning line across Ta-bin's ribs. He grunted, a sharp intake of breath, but he did not slow. He grabbed Eliza's rein. "Ride!" He spurred his mare at the sheer wall. He grabbed the sinew cord, and the horse, trained for this, clawed at the rock, finding purchase on a narrow, almost invisible game trail. They scrambled up the wall, the horse acting more like a goat, Ta-bin pulling, guiding, and in a moment they were at the top, on the rim, leaving the blind. Screaming men in the darkness of their own making. They rode for another mile, Ta-bin's breath coming in short, sharp hisses. His hand pressed to his side. The satchel was safe, slung over his own shoulder. He finally stopped them on a wide, flat ledge that overlooked a deep, churning gorge. A single, flimsy, rope-and-plank bridge crossed it, sagging in the wind. And waiting on their side of the bridge were two men, Silas Vane and Marshall Kincaid. They were not surprised. They had been waiting. Behind Ta-bin and Eliza, the Comancheros, their vision returning, were now riding up the main trail, blocking their escape. "That was quite a show, Miss Hartford," Silas Vane said, his voice calm, conversational. He was immaculate, his Boston suit untouched by dust. "Magnesium. Was it not a clever trick?" Marshall Kincaid was not in the mood for talk. He spat. "They got the bag, boss." "I can see that, Marshall," Vane said. His cold eyes moved to Ta-bin. "Give it to me. Boy, you are wounded, you are outnumbered, and you are out of time." Kincaid pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Ta-bin of the Noconi and Eliza Hartford. By authority of the United States government and a federal seizure order, I am commandeering all materials related to the illegal surveying of this territory. That means the map. And..." His eyes went to her camera box. "Your little box of tricks. Hand it over. It is evidence." Ta-bin's hand was on his knife. Eliza could see the dark stain spreading on his buckskin. He was preparing to die, and to take them with him. Eliza stepped in front of him. "No," she said, her voice shaking just enough to be believable. "Do not shoot. Please, it is all a mistake." She held up her hands. "The satchel," she said to Ta-bin, her voice low. "Please." He stared at her, his eyes full of fire and betrayal. "Please," she whispered again. "Trust me." He slowly, reluctantly, passed her the bag. Eliza's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was her camera box, and inside that, her glass plates. She knew, by feel, which one was the map. It was the one with the texture. She fumbled with the plates, her back to Vane and Kincaid, shielding her actions with her body. "They are so fragile," she murmured. She pulled out a plate. It was dark, a rectangle of glass. She held it up. This is just a picture of my aunt's barn. It is ruined." She had taken her blank, unexposed plates from their box and wrapped them, just as her aunt's friend had done. But she had also kept the ones she had spoiled, the first fogged, useless plates she had made while testing her chemicals. She pulled one of these out now. It was a milky, gray, fogged plate, worthless, but to an untrained eye, it was just a dark piece of glass. "Here," she said, her voice breaking. "Take it. It is all I have." She held out the spoiled plate. The decoy. Kincaid, impatient, snatched it from her hand. He squinted at it. "Looks like nothing." "Of course it does, you fool," Vane said, taking it from him. "It is a wet plate negative. The secret is in the glass." He smiled, a thin, triumphant smile, and tucked the plate safely inside his own coat. A wise decision, Miss Hartford. Perhaps you will not hang after all. He looked up. The sky, which had been clear, was now a sheet of low, bruised, purple cloud, a low rumble, not of thunder, but of something vast and heavy, filled the air. "The storm," Tabin whispered, his eyes on the western horizon. "It is early." The first drop of rain, as large as a dollar coin, hit the rock at Eliza's feet, then another, then the sky ripped open. It was not rain, it was a deluge, a solid wall of water that hit the plains and came roaring toward the gorge. The wind screamed, a physical blow. A flash of lightning lit the scene, and in that instant, Eliza saw the rope bridge. It was already sagging, the far anchor pulling loose from the mud. "The bridge!" Vane yelled, his composure gone. He and Kincaid ran for it, trying to cross back to the main trail. "Get the horses, get—" His voice was lost in a deafening crack. A wall of brown, churning water, a flash flood, slammed into the gorge. It ripped the bridge from its moorings as if it were a child's toy. Vane and Kincaid were trapped on the far side, their faces a mask of fury. "We have them!" Kincaid yelled, pulling his pistol. He was taking aim, across the roaring water. "This way!" Tabin grabbed Eliza's hand. He was not running from the water. He was running toward it, toward the edge of the cliff, where a small stream, now a raging waterfall, poured into the gorge. "Where are we going?" she screamed. "The old path, the path of my grandfathers." He pulled her straight through the curtain of the waterfall. For a moment, she was blind, suffocating in cold, hammering water. Then she was on a narrow, slick ledge, behind the falls. Carved into the rock wall were a series of small, deep handholds. "Trust me!" he yelled over the roar. "Climb!" She looked at him, his face a grim mask, his hand, slick with water and his own blood, outstretched to her. She looked back through the water. Vane and Kincaid were firing, their bullets useless against the rock and the water. She took his hand. "I do." They climbed, the world a roaring chaos of wind and water around them. He climbed above her, his good arm pulling, hauling, his feet sure. She followed, her fingers raw, her camera box a heavy, awkward weight, but she did not let it go. They emerged at the top, soaked, gasping, on a high wind-swept plateau. The storm raged around them, but in the center of the plateau, in a wide circle of ancient, moss-covered stones, it seemed quieter. It was the ancient creek bed. It was not dry. From a deep fissure in the center rock, a clear, steady stream of water bubbled up, defiant of the drought. The rocks all around it were carved with the familiar shapes of the bear and the eagle, the stars from the map. They were not alone. 10 Bears was there, standing motionless, his arms folded. With him were the other elders, and a small, grim delegation from Willow Mound. Mr. Patterson, the blacksmith, his arms like oak logs, held a heavy buffalo rifle. The town's preacher, his face stern, and 2 other ranchers, men Eliza had seen, men Vane was known to be squeezing. Tabin stumbled, his hand going to his bloody side. He nodded once to 10 Bears, a greeting of equals. Eliza, her hair plastered to her face, her dress soaked, her heart hammering against her ribs, unslung her satchel. She opened the camera box. She reached past the spoiled decoys, and her fingers closed around the one true plate, the one with the textured, invisible map. She pulled it out. The time for deceit was over. The time for the truth, for the stars, had come. The air on the high plateau was thin and electric. The storm, having thrown its tantrum, was a low, grumbling presence on the horizon, but the wind still tore at them, cold and wet. 10 Bears in the town's delegation stood like stones, their faces grim, their rifles held with a quiet purpose. Tabin, his hand pressed to his bloody side, stood beside Eliza. His breathing was shallow. Eliza was living in a space between heartbeats. She felt the weight of the true glass plate in her hands. This was the moment. This was the appeal to a law higher than Kincaid's purchased badge. She moved toward the source of the spring, the water bubbling clear and bright from the fissure in the rock. The stone around it was dark with moss and the carved, ancient symbols of the constellations. She knelt, her soaked dress pooling around her, and held the glass plate over the carvings. The star that does not move, the one Tabin had shown her, was carved directly above the spring's eye. The lines on her glass, the map of the water, matched the carvings in the stone perfectly. The map was not a discovery. It was a key to what was already here. "It matches," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "Tabin, it is true." She leaned closer, her fingers tracing the carved line of the bear, her other hand holding the glass steady for 10 bears to see. The rain had made the moss treacherous, slick as grease. Her foot, numb with cold and adrenaline, slid. She did not have time to cry out. A small gasp, a scrape of boot on rock, and she was gone, plunging sideways into the deep, dark pool of the spring itself. The water was not just cold. It was a physical blow, a liquid shock that stole her breath and her senses. It was the ancient, frozen heart of the earth, bubbling to the surface. It was like falling into a coffin of ice. Her heavy, soaked skirts dragged her down, and the world went black and silent. Tabin saw her go, the fire in his ribs, the exhaustion, vain, all of it vanished. There was only her. He moved, not as a man, but as a pounce. He lunged, ignoring the scream of his torn muscles, and plunged his arms into the frigid water. His hand caught her hair. He hauled, his teeth clenched, a low animal sound of effort in his throat. He pulled her dead weight up, and out, dragging her onto the slick rock like a drowned thing. She was not breathing. She was blue, her lips pale, her eyes closed. He gave her no dignity. He turned her over and slammed his open palm onto her back. Once, twice. She choked, coughed, and a gush of icy water spilled from her mouth. She inhaled, a ragged, desperate shriek of air, and then, immediately, began to shake. It was a violence. Her entire body convulsed, her teeth clacking together so hard he thought they would break. Tabin knew this. He had seen it. This was the death wind, the cold that ate the life from the inside out. They had minutes. He ripped his heavy, dry wool blanket from his saddle roll, where his mare stood. Trembling, he shoved the precious glass plate, which Eliza had somehow, impossibly, kept clutched in her hand, at the blacksmith. "Hold this, do not break it." He threw the blanket at Eliza. She could not catch it. Her hands were useless claws. "Listen to me," he roared, his voice cutting through her terror. "Behind that rock, get your clothes. Off now." He grabbed her arm, pulled her to her feet, and shoved her toward a high cluster of boulders that offered the only shelter from the wind. He did not watch her go. He turned his back, a solid, unmoving wall of respect, his own body braced against the wind, his eyes on 10 bears. The old chief nodded once, a grim acknowledgement of the necessary. Behind the rock, Eliza fumbled with her buttons. Her fingers were wood. They would not obey. The shaking was so bad. She could barely stand. She was dying. She knew it. The cold was a living thing inside her, crushing her heart. She tore at the wet, heavy dress, ripping the fabric, and let it fall. She was naked, curled in on herself, her skin a map of goose flesh, her mind fogged and distant. Tabin heard it, the sound of her teeth, the low, hopeless moan. This was not enough. He turned. "It is not enough. You will die." He grabbed the edges of the single blanket. He stepped behind the rock, into the small, sheltered space. She was a pale, shaking huddle, her knees to her chest. He did not pause. He did not ask. This was not Boston. This was survival. He sat, pulling her back against him, his body a solid wall. He wrapped the blanket around them both, pulling it tight, cocooning them. He was a furnace, his skin burning with his wound's fever, his exertion. She was a block of ice. "Be still," he commanded, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "Take my heat. Breathe." She gasped as his skin touched hers, a contact so painfully, shockingly warm it was like being branded. She was pressed against his bare chest, her back to him, her head tucked under his chin. She could feel the hard, steady beat of his heart, a rhythm of life in the frozen chaos. She could feel the fire from his ribs, where he bled. The shaking did not stop, but it changed. The violence eased. The convulsive shudders became a deep trembling. He was life. He was warmth. He was saving her. Again. She let her head fall back against his shoulder. Her hand, her fingers still numb, found his. She did not know she was doing it. Her fingers tangled with his. A simple, desperate grip. And then she turned. A small, convulsive movement in his arms. She was not cold anymore. She was alive, and he was the reason. She looked up at him. His face was inches away, his eyes dark, his expression not of passion, but of a fierce, protective, agonizing concentration. Her lips were blue, but they were her own. She lifted her face, the last small distance, and pressed her mouth to his. It was a kiss of ice and salt and rain. It was a question. He answered. He did not kiss her back. He consumed her. His other arm, the one not holding the blanket shut, came up and tangled in her wet, freezing hair, holding her head as if she were the last drop of water in the world. He kissed her with all the fury and the loss, all the broken promises and the desperate hope of the last 5 days. He kissed her like he owned the stars. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a vow, a desperate, defiant act of life in the face of death. He was the young Comanche, and she was his, and he was hers, and the wind and the rocks and the ancestors were their witness. He broke away, his breath a ragged gasp, his forehead pressed to hers. The world was spinning. "Eliza," he breathed, the name a prayer. "Tabin," she whispered back. Her hands were on his chest, feeling the heat, the life. "This cannot be," he said, his voice thick, his eyes closed. "It is not the way." "It is the only way," she whispered. I think I feel." She could not find the words of her Boston world. "I know," he said. And he did. He felt it too, a thing as vast and terrifying as the storm. When this is over, when the water is safe, when your aunt is well, he pulled back, just enough to look in her eyes. "We will do this the right way, before your people, before mine. A promise, not a theft in the cold." She nodded, tears she did not know she had blurring with the rain on her face. "A promise." "Dress," he said, his voice rough. He unwrapped the blanket, letting her keep it, and pulled a dry buckskin shirt and leggings from his own saddlebag, which he had pulled in with them. "They are not yours, but they are dry. I will watch." He stepped out from behind the rock, his face set, his body braced, as if he had just wrestled with a god and was not sure who had won. A new sound, not the wind, not the water, hoofbeats, many. Tabin was already moving, his bow in his hand, as Eliza, dressed in his oversized, blessedly dry buckskins, stepped out from behind the stone. At the far end of the plateau, where the main trail crested, Silas Vane and Marshal Kincaid appeared. They were not alone. Behind them were a dozen armed men, the hard-faced Comancheros and railroad men, Vane's private army. They fanned out, their rifles ready. "Well," Vane called, his voice a mocking drawl that cut through the wind. A convocation, the old, the criminal, and the damp. Patterson, the blacksmith, leveled his heavy buffalo gun. "This is a legal council," Vane called by the elders. "This," Kincaid snarled, pulling his pistol, "is a federal seizure. You are all trespassing, and you," he pointed at Tabin, "are under arrest for murder and insurrection." Tabin did not even look at him. He looked at Ten Bears. The old chief watched the men spread out. He seemed untroubled. He turned his back on Vane, walked to a pile of wood stacked in a fire pit, and calmly touched a lit match to the oil-soaked kindling. With a whoosh, a column of thick, black smoke rose into the gray sky. Vane laughed. "A smoke signal a little late. Old man, who are you calling your ghosts?" From 3 separate canyons, riders appeared. They were not Noconi. They were white ranchers, men from Willow Mound, small farmers, their hunting rifles and shotguns held at the ready. They emerged silently, taking up positions on the ridges, surrounding Vane's men, trapping them. Vane's smile faltered. Eliza stepped forward. The buckskins felt strange, but right, she was no longer a Boston photographer. She was a survivor. She held up the true glass plate, the one Patterson handed back to her. "You have the wrong map, Mr. Vane," she called out, her voice clear and strong. She held the plate against the central, carved rock, aligning the stars, the light of the fire catching the image. "This is the map, and it matches the stone. It proves this spring is on sacred, communal land, and the law in this rock, says the water belongs to all to be shared." Ten Bears stepped beside her, his hand raised. "The stone does not lie, the star does not move, the water is for all. This is the law." Vane's face was a mask of pure, reptilian rage. His hand fell to the pistol at his hip. "The law," he hissed, "is what I say it is." "The law," Silas Vane hissed, his hand dropping to the gleaming pistol at his hip, "is what I say it is." Marshal Kincaid, emboldened, took a step forward, his own men fanning out behind him. "This is a seizure by federal authority. You are all under arrest for interfering." He waved his official-looking paper. "The railroad needs this land. Progress needs this land." The air was still, a perfect, tense bubble. It was broken by Ten Bears. He did not shout. He spoke, and his voice, though not loud, carried over the wind. "The paper you hold is a lie. The law is in the stone. It was carved by the first grandfathers, when their horses were the wind. The stone says the Creator put the water here, and it does not belong to one man, one tribe, or one iron horse. It belongs to all who thirst." Kincaid laughed, a short, ugly bark. "The law is a piece of paper, old man, and I have it, this." He waved the document. "Is from Austin. It gives me the right—" "No," Eliza said. Her voice was clear, and it cut through Kincaid's bluster. "It does not." All eyes turned to her. She was standing in borrowed buckskins, her hair a wild, drying tangle, but her face was set, not with fear, but with a cold, clear certainty. "That paper, Marshal," she said, "is your crime." "What is this?" Kincaid growled, his hand tightening on his pistol. "A girl's hysterics." "I am a photographer, Marshal," Eliza said, and she reached into her satchel. Vane's men tensed, but she did not pull out a weapon. She pulled out a second glass plate. It was not the map, it was a photograph. "I document things. I record the truth." She held it up. It was a clear, sharp image. A photograph of a desk, papers scattered on it. In the center, clear as day, was a stack of blank federal forms, and beside them, an inkwell, a pen, and the heavy, embossed seal of the Austin District Court. "Your office?" "Marshal," she said, her voice ringing. "I was in town for 2 days, while my aunt was lying in the doctor's office. I went to your office to file a complaint. You were not there, but this was on your desk, blank forms, and a seal. You were making your own law, just as you said. Kincaid's face went from red to a pasty, sick white. That is a lie that proves nothing. It proves you are a forger, Eliza said. But I am not finished, Mr. Vane. She turned to him. You have a plate of glass you believe is a map. It is a fogged, worthless decoy. I have the map. She held the true map plate high. And Tabin, her voice rose, has the proof of your other crimes. Tabin, his face a mask of pain, his hand pressed to his side, looked up. He put 2 fingers to his lips and whistled, a high, piercing sound that cut the wind. For a moment, nothing. Then, from the canyon they had escaped, a new sound, a thunder of hooves. It was not Vane's men, it was Tabin's young scout. He was on foot, but he was not alone. He was driving a terrified, snorting herd of horses, 20 or more, straight into the plateau. The horses, seeing the crowd, milled in confusion, trapping Vane's men. What is this? Vane demanded. Proof, Tabin shouted, his voice a roar. He pointed to the horses, his arm trembling. Look at them, the Circle brand, the Comanche brand, your brand, Vane. And look at the roan, look at the bay. The U.S. brand he steals from the Noconi. He steals from the ranchers, and he steals from the soldiers he is pretending to serve. It was true. The brands, clear on the horses' flanks, were an unanswerable accusation. Vane was not a speculator. He was a warlord, a common horse-thieving outlaw. Patterson, the blacksmith, let out a low growl. He stole my mare. I see her. Vane was trapped. His law was paper. His army was stolen. His map was a fake. He was surrounded by ranchers who knew him, by a warrior he could not kill, and by a woman he could not silence. He did what all cornered, desperate men do. He chose chaos. Fire! Vane screamed, his voice cracking. Fire, kill them all, and we take the water. His core men, the hard-case Comancheros, raised their rifles. They were paid to kill, not to think. A rifleman on the ridge aimed not at Tabin, but at the leader, at 10 Bears. He never fired, Tabin moving with a speed that defied his wound. Threw his knife. It was not a killing throw. It spun, flat, striking the rifle, knocking the barrel wide just as the man fired. The shot went high. The rifleman, enraged, dropped his gun and pulled his pistol. Tabin was on him. It was a blur. The man fired twice, the bullets kicking up dust. Tabin was inside his reach, his short bow a club, his arm a bar. He did not kill. He was a guardian. He fought to disarm, to stop, to protect. A second gunman, farther down the ridge, saw the fight. He raised his rifle, drawing a careful bead on Tabin's back. Eliza saw him. She screamed. Tabin could not hear. Her camera box was at her feet. She had no plates. She had no time. But she had the powder. Her hands, no longer shaking, moved with the precision of her craft. She ripped the tin open. She pulled her striker. She aimed the empty, open box at the sniper and struck the flint. The explosion of white, blinding light was a second, silent thunder. The sniper, his eye at the sight, received the full, brutal force of the flash. He screamed, a high, thin sound, and fell back, his rifle clattering on the rocks, his hands clutching his ruined, smoking eyes. The plateau was a stalemate. Tabin was wrestling with his man. Vane's men were raising their guns. No, Patterson, the blacksmith, roared. He was not a killer, but he was a protector. He raised his heavy buffalo rifle to the sky and fired. The sound, a deep, deafening boom, was a full stop. The other ranchers and townspeople on the ridge followed his lead. They fired a volley, a dozen rifles at once. Not at Vane's men, but into the air. It was a warning. It was a judgment. It was the sound of a community claiming its own. Into the ringing silence, a new voice called out, calm and full of iron. I would suggest you all drop those weapons. Now. 3 men rode onto the plateau. They were not ranchers. They were not Comancheros. They wore clean, dusty uniforms. The man in the lead had a bright, clean badge pinned to his vest. Marshal Davies, from Clay County. He said he was not looking at Vane. He was looking at Eliza. I received your letter, ma'am, he said, his voice calm. Delivered by a Comanche runner who rode 2 horses to death. It said the law was for sale in this county, and a woman's life was in danger. It appears. His eyes swept the scene. The stolen horses. Kincaid's white face. Vane's gunmen. You were not exaggerating. Eliza's letter. The one she had sent, days ago, before the fire. An act of desperate, fading hope. Davies's gaze settled on Kincaid. Marshal, he said, the word an insult. I see a federal order in your hand, and I see a half-dozen stolen cavalry horses, and I see a known forger's seal. He nodded to Eliza's plate. You are under arrest. As Davies's 2 deputies moved forward, their shotguns level. Kincaid threw his hands in the air, but Silas Vane was not a man to be taken. He was a creature of motion. He spurred his black thoroughbred. The horse, a magnificent animal, leaped a low rock, scattering ranchers, and took off. He was not riding for the canyon. He was riding for the open plain, for the east. He would have made it, but the land he had tried to steal, had one more vote. From the clouds, a single stray fork of lightning, a spiteful afterthought from the storm, struck the prairie. It did not strike Vane. It struck the grass, 50 yards in front of him. The grass, cured by months of drought, did not catch fire. It exploded. A wall of orange flame, 20 feet high, erupted from the ground. A curtain drawn across the world. Vane reined in his horse, the animal screaming. He was silhouetted for a moment, a black shape against a new roaring. Man-made hell. He turned his horse, his face a mask of terror, and spurred it, not toward the law, but away into the smoke, toward the Badlands. A dead man running. On the plateau, there was only the sound of the wind and the distant, hungry roar of the fire. Kincaid, his face gray, was in handcuffs. Vane's men, leaderless, dropped their guns. Marshal Davies looked at the spring, at Ten Bears, at Patterson, at Eliza. My God, he said, what have you done? We have made a compact. Eliza said she was exhausted, but her voice was strong. On the back of Kincaid's forged federal order, they wrote their own, the Ancient Creek Compact. The water would be shared. A new, deeper well would be dug for the railroad, funded by them, but it would be sited a mile south, away from the sacred ground. The Noconi would have their spring. The town would have its water. Get this to the telegraph office, Eliza said, handing the paper to Davies. Send it to Austin. Send it to my father's newspaper in Boston. Tell them the truth. Tell them what happened here. Davies nodded, his face full of a new, raw respect. He took the paper. The tension was broken. The fight was over. The adrenaline that had held Tabin together, the fire that had been his strength, all of it seeped out of him. The world, which had been so sharp, so bright, went gray at the edges. His hand, slick with his own blood, could no longer hold his weight. Eliza, he whispered. It was the only word he had. He fell. She was there. She was not the woman who had fallen from the stagecoach. She was the woman who had survived the fire. She caught him, her arms strong, his dead weight a terrible, precious burden. She sank to the rock, pulling him with her, his head cradled in her lap, his body on the stone that his ancestors had carved. He was alive. His eyes were closed, his breathing a shallow, painful rasp. The bullet had taken too much. She pressed her hand to his wound, a useless, desperate gesture. Live, she whispered to him, her voice fierce. You promised. You made a vow. She looked up, At the ranchers, at the elders, at the law, she had won. They had won. And she held the cost of it in her arms. She bent her head over his, her wild hair covering his face, and for the first of all the right reasons, she wept. He did not die. He was a man made of sinew and stubborn honor, and he had promised to live. But it was a near thing. They carried him, a dead weight, into a teepee that the Noconi women raised in an hour, a pale cone of shelter set near the bubbling spring. For 3 days, he did not know the world. He lived in the gray, burning land of fever, his body at war with the poison in his wound. Eliza did not leave his side. She was a strange nurse, a mix of Boston practicality and a new, raw-boned instinct. The Noconi women, led by an old, wise-eyed woman named Water Seeks the Moon, brought her poultices of willow bark and a bitter, green-smelling paste. Eliza, in turn, used the clean water from the spring and the last of her carbolic acid, a small bottle she had kept with her camera, to clean the long, ragged gash along his ribs. The bullet had torn the flesh, but missed the bone. He had been lucky. He had been strong. She sat in the dim, smoky light of the lodge, the sounds of the camp a low murmur outside. She watched the rise and fall of his chest. She learned the map of his face, the high, sharp cheekbones, the scar at his temple, the way his mouth, so hard in waking, was softer in sleep. She fed him water, a spoonful at a time, from the spring itself. She was pouring the sacred water, the water he had nearly died to protect, back into him. Outside the lodge, a new world was being built. The compact, written on the back of Kincaid's forged order, had held. Marshal Davies had sent the message from the Willow Mound Telegraph, and the reply from the railroad, and from Austin, had been swift. The scandal of Vane's horse thievery, coupled with Kincaid's forgery, had been too toxic. The railroad, fearing a public relations disaster in the Eastern papers that Eliza had so cannily mentioned, had capitulated. They agreed to the new well. A mile south, they agreed to avoid the sacred land. The victory was real, and it was being written in earth and stone. Patterson, the blacksmith, his face streaked with sweat, worked side by side with Stonehand, the young warrior who had wanted Eliza cast out. They were not friends, not yet, but they shared a purpose. They were directing a new, shallow ditch, a small diversion, to carry a share of the spring's overflow toward the dry creek bed that led to Willow Mound. They argued over the angle of the drop, Patterson with his level, Stonehand with his eye, and 10 Bears watched them both, a small, satisfied smile on his face. The children, at first, were the most suspicious. The white children from the town, brought by their rancher parents, huddled in one group. The Noconi children huddled in another. But the spring was a magnet. A small Noconi boy with a reed flute, a white girl with a porcelain-headed doll. They watched each other. They watched the water spiders. By the 4th day, they were a single, shrieking, muddy tribe, chasing each other around the star-carved rocks, their laughter the first, true sound of peace. Eliza's aunt was brought from Willow Mound, carried on a cot by Patterson himself. The bullet was still in her, the doctor had said, and would remain a permanent, painful souvenir. But her spirit was tough. She sat propped on her cot near the spring, her face pale, but her eyes sharp. "Well, Eliza," she had said, her voice a dry rasp, "you have certainly redecorated." Not everyone was convinced. A rancher named Jedediah Stearns, a man whose land Vane had not yet touched, rode up, his face a knot of red anger. He saw Patterson and Stonehand working on the ditch. "Patterson, what in God's name are you doing? You are giving away our water to them." Patterson, who was not a man given to speeches, straightened his back. He pointed his shovel at Stearns. "First, Jedediah, it is not our water. We just found that out. It is the water. Second, we are not giving it. We are sharing it. which is what decent folk do. He gestured with his chin toward Eliza's healing lodge. And third, if it was not for that woman and the man she is currently keeping alive, Vane would own your land by now, and Kincaid would be charging you $1 a cup for the privilege of dying of thirst. We are all drinking from this spring. You can take your share and be grateful, or you can ride back to your dry well and be thirsty. Your choice. Stearns looked at the hard faces of the other ranchers. He looked at the quiet, watchful Noconi warriors. He looked at the children playing. He spat, turned his horse, and rode away. He did not come back. On the 7th day, Tabin woke. His eyes were clear. The fever was broken. He looked at Eliza, and she was not the blurry, fever dream woman who had been spooning water into his mouth. She was real, solid, her face smudged with soot, her hair braided back, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You lived," she whispered, her hand going to her heart. "You stayed," he answered, his voice a rough croak. The intimacy of the sick room was shattered. He was awake. He was Tabin. She was Eliza. The memory of the cold, the kiss, the heat, all of it rushed back. A thing of impossible complication. She stood, suddenly awkward, her hands fumbling with the water basin. "You were wounded," she said, her voice too formal. The women, we tended it." He looked down at his side. The wound was clean, bound in fresh linen strips. "You did well," he said. It was, for him, a speech. 10 bears declared a feast, a celebration of the water. They roasted a buffalo, brought by the hunters. The women made bread, sweet and heavy with corn. The sounds of drums, a low, steady heartbeat, filled the plateau. A Noconi woman, the one who had first brought the herbs, came to Eliza. She smiled, her face a net of kind wrinkles, and pulled her by the hand. "Come," she said, in broken English. "You dance." They made her join the circle. It was a slow, shuffling dance, a simple step to the beat of the drum. Eliza was clumsy, her Boston feet unable to find the rhythm of the earth. She stumbled, and the women laughed. Not at her, but with her, pulling her back into the moving circle. She looked across the fire. Tabin was there, standing for the first time, leaning on a cottonwood staff. He was watching her, and he was smiling. It was not his grim, fighting smile. It was a true, soft, unguarded smile, and it hit her with the force of a revelation. It made her feet tangle all over again. The next day, the railroad men came. This was a new crew, not Vane's thugs, but engineers, sober men in clean shirts. They came with Marshal Davies. They were here to honor the compact. Eliza had an idea. Her camera, miraculously, had survived. The box was scarred, but the lens was intact. She had saved a few plates, and her chemicals. She set up the tripod, on the sacred ground, by the spring. "A memory," she said to 10 bears, "so no one can ever forget what we all agreed." She gathered them. It was a difficult portrait. She put 10 bears and Marshal Davies in the center, the old law and the new. She put Patterson and Stonehand beside them, their hands on their shovels. She mixed the Noconi families with the ranchers. She put her aunt sitting in a chair, in the front like a queen, the railroad men. She placed on the far edge, their hats in their hands, looking awkward, separate but present. Tabin stood behind her, watching. She ducked under the dark cloth. She held up her hand. "Be still, for just a moment." She set off the magnesium flash. This time, it was not a weapon. It was an act of creation, a single, bright flash that captured the new world. That evening, the air was cool and calm. Tabin, his staff in hand, walked with her to the spring. They sat on the star-carved rock, their shoulders not quite touching. "My aunt," Eliza said, "will go back to Willow Mound. She says she will rebuild the stop. She is..." stubborn. Like her niece, he said. She smiled, looking at the water. My old life, my cameras, my teaching books, they all burned. I have nothing. You have the water, he said. You have the law. You have your life. I meant I have no purpose, she said, trying to explain the hollow feeling. The fight was over. What now? You spoke of your brother, she said, changing the subject. The one lost to the sickness. He nodded, his gaze distant. He was fast. He could run down a deer. The sickness took his breath. I lost my mother, she said, her voice soft. When I was young, I think I have been trying to make the world stand still ever after. To hold it on a glass plate, so it could not run away, so no one else would be lost. He looked at her, understanding dawning. The fire, it took all your memories. Yes, she whispered. And now, I am not sure what to make. I am not sure who I am without them. He looked at the children, still playing by the new diversion ditch. They know who they are. They are Nokoni. They are white, but they do not know each other. They do not know this. He tapped the rock, the stars. And they do not know the books, Eliza said, her mind catching his. The words. They will need both, he said, to survive Vane's world and to remember ours. A school. The idea was born in that moment, not as a building, but as a purpose. A small school, right here, by the water. A school with 2 teachers, an Nokoni woman to teach the way of the stars, and you, he said, to teach the way of the books and the light. My photographs, she said, I would. You will stay, he said. It was not a question. Yes, I will stay, and I will take my photographs. But only. She looked at him. With consent, with permission. Not to steal souls, but to show them, to show this. A shadow fell over them. 10 bears stood there. He had been watching them, as he watched everything. He held something in his hand. He did not speak of them, of the man and the woman. He spoke to Eliza, as the leader of a nation to another. Sa nu vipui, he said. His voice was warm. Tabin translated, his own voice thick. Daughter of the spring, you came with a good heart. You did not run. The old chief held out his hand. In it was a new, intricately beaded strand, longer and more beautiful than the one Tabin had given her. It was made of the same dark blue beads, the color of the deep spring water, and the pattern was the shape of the bear. The people. We are your people now. Tabin translated, as 10 bears placed the strand over Eliza's head, to rest on her shoulders. You have a home here. You are one of us. Eliza's hand went to the beads. They were cool and heavy. They were a promise. They were a purpose. They were a home. She looked at Tabin, and in his eyes, she saw not the end of the fight, but the beginning of the work. The fire smoke and the dust had cleared. The high plateau was no longer a place of battle, but a place of beginning. The sky was scrubbed clean by the storm, and that night, the stars were so bright they seemed to have weight, pressing down on the land in a blanket of cold, silver light. Eliza sat by the spring, the new beaded strand a cool, heavy promise on her shoulders. She was not a guest. She was home. Tabin, his side bound, his strength returning, came to sit beside her. He was no longer leaning on the staff. He walked with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who knew his own ground. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the 2 camps settling down. The Nokoni lodges were dark. The ranchers' wagons circled. The sounds were different, a low drum, a soft harmonica, but they were not at war. Tabin held something in his hand. He had been working on it for a day, his movements slow and careful. It was a knife, but not a weapon. The handle was of old, smooth cottonwood, and the blade was a sharp, dark piece of obsidian, flaked to a keen edge. It was bound in soft, brain-tanned deer hide. "My grandfather," he said, his voice low, "gave this to my father. He said it was not for killing, but for blessing, for cutting the cord, for marking the first harvest." He held it out to her. "The handle first. It is the keeper's knife. It is for the one who guards the sacred things, the one who guards the water." Eliza looked at it, then at him. She knew what this meant. It was a proposal. It was a life. It was a burden of honor. Her hand, steady, closed around the grip. It was warm from his skin. I do not know if I am strong enough." "You are," he said, simply. "You stood in the fire. You fell in the ice. You spoke the truth to the guns. You are strong enough." She had nothing. Her cameras were gone, save the one scarred box. Her old life was ash. But she had been working, too, in the quiet hours while he healed. She had taken the simple leather strap from her camera box, the one thing that had survived. With a needle given by the Noconi women and thread dyed with berries, she had been sewing. She had stitched the pattern of the bear, the stars she had learned, into the leather. It was clumsy, her stitches uneven, but it was from her heart. She held it out to him. "I have no great gift, no family honor. I only have this. It is for a man who sees, who remembers, who holds the light and the truth in his mind." He took the strap. He ran his thumb over the rough, beaded stars. He saw her, trying to speak his language, trying to meet him. He looped the strap over his head, and it lay across his bare chest, a strange, perfect fusion of her world and his. "We have made a promise," he said. "To the water," she answered. "To the people," he said. He leaned in, his eyes holding hers. "Now, to each other." She met him. This was not the desperate, icy kiss of survival. This was a kiss of choice. It was slow and warm, and it tasted of wood smoke and clean water. It was a promise to build. "I make this vow," she whispered against his mouth, her Boston words and her new life mixing. "I will not sell the water. I will not sell the people. And I will never, ever sell the truth." "It is my vow," he answered, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "My path is your path." There was no grand ceremony. There was, 2 days later, a simple gathering by the spring. 10 bears stood on one side. Eliza's aunt, wrapped in a blanket, sat in a chair on the other. The preacher from Willow Mound, a man who now understood a law older than his own books, said a few words. 10 bears smoked a pipe, the smoke rising in a single, straight line, a blessing. Patterson the blacksmith had forged a simple iron ring, a circle, a symbol they both understood. They were married. That night, the lodge by the spring was theirs. It was not a fade to black on a moment of passion. It was a fade to the deep, steady warmth of a lodge fire. A world narrowed to the scent of sage and skin. A place of quiet, held breaths, and the slow, certain respectful beginning of a shared life. It was a commitment, made in safety, and blessed by the two worlds that were, at last, one. The next season, the plateau, the ancient creek bed, was no longer a secret, but a center. The spring grass, fed by the shared water, grew thick and green. The railroad, true to its word, had built its pump station a mile south, and the sound of its whistle was a distant, harmless thing. Patterson had carved a simple wooden sign, and 10 bears had had one of his men carve the symbols of the stars above it. It stood at the head of the trail. Water is memory to share as life. The school was built first. It was not much. A sodden plank building, half lodge, half schoolhouse. But it was theirs. In the mornings, the children, Noconi and White, sat inside. They learned to write their letters in English, their pencils scratching on slate. In the afternoons, Tabin and one of the elders would take them outside, and they would learn the symbols in the rock, and the names of the grasses, and how to read the clouds. Eliza had new cameras, sent from Boston by her worried, perplexed, but ultimately proud father, along with a crate of books. She set up her darkroom in a small shed by her lodge. She was not a documentarian of the exotic. She was a family photographer. She took portraits of the Noconi women with their babies. She took a picture of Patterson and Stonehand, laughing as they built a new, stronger bridge over the town ditch. She captured the children, all one tribe, in a blurry, joyous race. She was recording not a dying world, but a living one. One bright afternoon, she and Tabin were walking by the spring. He walked with a slight limp, his wound a permanent reminder, a line of silvered skin he called his second map. She was heavy with their first child. A small girl, one of the rancher's daughters, was running too fast along the slick, star-carved rocks. She slipped, her foot sliding, her arms pinwheeling. Before Eliza could even gasp, Tabin was there. He had not run, he had just moved. His arm was a strong, sure circle, catching the child around the waist, lifting her clear, setting her on her feet. It was the same motion he had used to catch Eliza from the falling stagecoach. The girl, frightened, looked up at the tall warrior. Tabin smiled at her. The real smile, the one Eliza knew. "The stones are sacred," he said, his English slow and clear. "Walk on them with respect, little one, not with haste." The girl nodded, her eyes wide, and ran off to her mother. Eliza came and stood beside him, her hand on his arm. She was smiling. "A circle," she said. He put his arm around her, his hand resting on the swell of her belly. "He will know the stories," he said. "He," Eliza said, "or she, will know all the stories, the stars and the books." They looked out. The sun was setting, painting the Llano Estacado a deep, impossible ocean of orange and purple. A herd of wild horses, their manes flying, ran along the distant ridge, free and beautiful. From the Noconi camp, the low, steady beat of a drum began, a prayer to the end of the day. And from the valley, from Willow Mound, the sound of the new chapel bell, carried on the clear, cool air, rang out. They were not one sound, they were two, and for the first time, in this place, they were in harmony. He had chosen her forever, and she had chosen him. And together, they had chosen this land, this impossible, hard, beautiful land, and they had found a way to live in it that cost no one their dignity. Thank you so much for listening to our story here on Wild West Tales. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and let us know what part of the world you are in so we can all connect. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Tales, give this video a like, and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people. We appreciate your support.